We're about to enter week 10 of the fantasy football season, and you know if you want to win, you need that huge upside, those guys that can boom. Well, we're here to tell you our favorites for this week. First, let me remind you, we are proud to partner with Underdog Fantasy, and if you haven't tried it yet, it is the perfect time. If you use code ENDGAME, not only do you get a 100% deposit match, you can also take advantage of the new customer special for this week. Bryce Young on Thursday night just needs 1 yard. Go higher on that pick and combine it with any other pick that you like, and you can triple your money just like that. You've already doubled it just from signing up. Check it out now. It's a lot of fun. It's easy to play and all sorts of chances to win. All right, Chris, so who do you think is going to help us win in fantasy for week 10?
I really like Brandon Ayuk this week. This is a guy who started out hot this year, and then he kind of cooled off before the team's bye, but that kind of coincided also with Brock Purdy really cooling off. But I'm going to bet on Kyle Shanahan going into the bye and figuring things out and getting this offense righted coming out of the bye. And he gets a fantastic matchup this week against the Jaguars. You look at the Jaguars, they are a good defense. When you look at them overall as a defense, they're good. But they've kind of become a pass funnel defense because they're one of these defenses that you just can't run the ball against. They're currently allowing the 10th most points to wide receivers, but the second fewest points to running backs. Now, I don't expect him to shut down Christian McCaffrey or anything. You're still starting him. He's good. He'll be great. But I do think we're going to see the 49ers passing game be much better than we saw the previous 3 weeks. Brock Purdy has to be better. Kyle Shanahan had to figure things out. He's too smart, too good not to. They're going to take advantage of this secondary, of this passing defense. And Brandon Ayuk is the guy here. I know Debo's probably going to be back, but Debo is kind of what Debo is, right? He's a short A-dot guy, yard after catch guy. Brandon Ayuk is the down the field guy, the vertical guy, the red zone, end zone guy, which is huge when you're looking for a boom. So I think in this matchup against the Jaguars, it has all the makings of a boom week for Brandon Ayuk coming out of the bye. I know both these teams are coming out of the bye, but I think the 49ers coming out of the bye, they figure it out. We see the 49ers team that we saw earlier in the year that's ready to make a Super Bowl run, and Brandon Ayuk is going to be a big part of that, and it starts here in week 10.
Well, I'm going to go with a guy on the opposite side of that matchup, another receiver that you should feel pretty good about on a weekly basis. That's Christian Kirk. But I think this is another big week. You haven't heard much from him because he was also on a bye last week. And before that, well, he just kind of posted a mediocre line, 4 catches for 46 yards. Meanwhile, Calvin Ridley had a big game, so maybe you're worried. Is Ridley coming back and taking over as the top target in this offense? No. I don't think he is. I mean, Ridley will be up and down. He'll be okay at times for fantasy. I'm not giving up on him. I think he could put up some numbers in this game, but I'm going to rely on a guy like Christian Kirk, who has consistently been the go-to guy for Trevor Lawrence. San Francisco does give up a lot of points to wide receivers, believe it or not. They're bottom 5 in that category. You wouldn't think it, but they are. Even though they can pressure the quarterback and they're really good at times on defense, they do give up chunk plays to wide receivers, and they've done so all season. Christian Kirk is the guy I think benefits here. He's really good at beating man coverage. 49ers are probably going to press, and Calvin Ridley does not like that. He's not very good at that. You know what? Christian Kirk will be the safety blanket here, and he's also a big play threat. So in this game that I think could be a pretty high-scoring affair, Christian Kirk is a guy I'm going to count on to have another big Christian Kirk-type performance. All right, who else do you think could go off in Week 10?
Yeah, this might surprise some people because I was not on Aaron Jones during the draft process. I haven't really been on Aaron Jones this season. But I think this week I have to be on Aaron Jones because he finally looked healthy again in Week 9. Had 20 carries, 6 targets, 4 catches. He wasn't super efficient with those touches, but the fact that he got all those touches tells me he's healthy, and it tells me that the coaches believe that he is healthy. He was once again the lead back here. A.J. Dillon barely involved, and now he gets a fantastic matchup against the Steelers defense that's allowing the 7th most points to running backs. They're actually okay against the pass. I mean, we saw that last week against Tennessee. The rookie Joey Porter did a great job against DeAndre Hopkins. The secondary is getting better after a rough start, but they're still not very good against the run. I think there's going to be plenty of chances here for Aaron Jones as a runner, as a receiver, and he's basically the entire offense here because Jordan Love is terrible, and we're talking about a road game Against the Steelers, I don't think Jordan Love is going to be any good. It's going to have to be Aaron Jones doing most of the heavy lifting here for the Packers. And I think this week he does, and he comes through with a great game. And I'll say this, not only do I love him in your fantasy lineups if you have him, but I also love him on underdog. I love his line, higher than 54.5 yards rushing. I think he goes over that easy. If he comes anywhere close to 20 carries again in this matchup, he is smashing that line. You pair that line with the new customer special Pierre talked about in the beginning with Bryce Young. You instantly can triple your entry. Make sure you use promo code ENDGAME when you sign up at Underdog Fantasy.
All right, well, I like another running back in that division, but Detroit, it's all about Jahmyr Gibbs lately. Let's remember who the real lead running back is there. It's David Montgomery. He should be back this week, and he's going to be the 1A. Look, I know Gibbs might get a little bit more run than he did before the Monty injury, but don't be fooled. Montgomery will continue to work as the lead back. And let's remember also what he did before that injury. He was coming off back-to-back 100-yard rushing games, and he has scored 6 touchdowns in 5 games this season. We already know the appeal of being a running back in Detroit these days behind that offensive line. He's always going to have touchdown upside, and I really like the fact he gets to play the Chargers this week. Not a great run defense. This is a team that will give up touchdowns to running backs. So although Gibbs has been better, and yes, Gibbs will have some involvement, look, David Montgomery is a guy I have to start. You want to continue to use him as you were before. When asked about the running back situation heading into Week 10, Dan Campbell basically said, we're going to ask these guys to do the things that they do well and that help us move the football. Well, what does that mean? That means Montgomery's going to be the goal line back. You already know this. He's going to be the main guy between the 20s. He's going to basically continue to do what he'd been doing. So how did you value David Montgomery before his injury? Pretty much as a must start. I think he's pretty much a must start. And in this matchup, I think he's going to have another big game. All right, who else could have another big game?
Yeah, it's been a while since Chris Olave really boomed. I mean, he was good last week, but I wouldn't really call that a boom. But I think this week he does boom in a great matchup against the Vikings. This defense still not very good against wide receivers. They're currently giving up the 8th most points to wide receivers, but that's because they got to play against Taylor Heineke without Drake London, where the Falcons basically used Jonnu Smith, the tight end, like a wide receiver. If you look at them before that game, they had allowed the 4th most points to wide receivers. I think we see Chris Olave go out there and have an even bigger game than last week. This is a guy who's had 8 or more targets in all but 2 games, and he's had 10 or more targets in 5 games. He's pretty much the only wide receiver they throw to. Don't talk to me about Rashid Shaheed when he randomly goes off for a big game once every 6 or 7 games. Not expecting that this week. Sure, maybe he'll catch a long touchdown, but that's all he's going to do, if anything. And definitely don't talk to me about Michael Thomas, who looks like total dust. Chris Olave is by far the number 1 target here, the number 1 wide receiver. Had a nice game last week. I think he builds off that, has an even better game. And the nice thing is when you play the Vikings, you're in the dome, so you don't have to worry about any weather. The conditions are perfect here. Love this matchup for Chris Olave. I think he booms here in Week 10.
Now, we definitely want to exploit strong matchups against weak defenses. So on that same note, look, the Washington secondary is one of the worst, and they're a team that is going to get worse on defense because they lost because they chose to trade away their 2 best pass rushers. It's going to be a feast for a lot of receivers against this secondary, as it has been all year. So this week, playing against Seattle, I take your pick. Which wide receiver could go off? Well, you know who I'm picking? I'm going with the rookie, Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now, here's the reason. We talk about rookies after the bye, towards midseason, start to kind of come on and take over. I really think it's happening because if you look at last week, JSN had more receptions than both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett combined. And no, injuries weren't a factor. Neither one of those veteran receivers were on the injury report. It's just a matter of the fact that Geno Smith is now making him his preferred target. He's starting to go to him more on first read targets. I mean, he was already number 2 in targets last week, only 1 less than Tyler Lockett, but he caught more of them. JSN is now emerging. So against this Washington secondary, which over the last 4 weeks alone has allowed 7 touchdowns to receivers and the most yards per target. That's 11.26. Those games where Jason's getting 50, 60 yards, maybe a touchdown, this week could bump up to 80, 90, maybe his first 100-yard game in the NFL. So if I have JSN, I mean, first of all, he should not be on waivers anymore, anywhere. If he is, snatch him up. And if I have him, I'm going to go ahead and start him because I feel like this could be his true breakout game. All right, who else do you have in mind for a boom week?
Yeah, it's not very often I say a tight end is going to boom, but I think Dalton Kincaid is going to boom, and he kind of has been booming, especially by tight end standards. Led the team with 11 targets and 10 catches last week. He's had 7 or more targets in each of the last 3 games. And now he gets a matchup against the Denver Broncos defense that allows the second most points to tight ends on the season. Look, this Bills offense has been looking for a reliable number 2 behind Stephon Diggs for a couple years now. Everybody keeps expecting it to be Gabe Davis, and when he has that random big game like he had 2 weeks ago, they're like, see, he's the number 2, and then he goes back to doing absolutely nothing. Maybe Dalton Kincaid is the number 2 guy. Maybe he can be that guy in this offense. And in this matchup, I'm going to find out. I'm going to put him in. I mean, look, he's coming very close to being a guy you have to start in the tight end position no matter what. But I think this week, he could be one of the highest scoring tight ends, one of the highest scoring players in fantasy because it's such a great matchup. They're back at home. They're on primetime, Monday Night Football. We're going to see him get better. Josh Allen, I think, is going to be better. I expect the Bills to pour it on the Broncos, and I expect Dalton Kincaid to be a big part of that. I think Dalton Kincaid is not only going to boom for a tight end, but he's going to boom for all players.
Well, I'm going to take a little bit of a gamble on a guy who really shouldn't be a gamble. Chris Godwin, coming off a pretty down week. I think he gets right, and I think he could be a guy who is one of the top receivers for Week 10 because he's getting to play Tennessee. And look, Tampa Bay, even though they're coming off a really tough loss, that offense showed me something. They're really coming into their own. They're figuring things out. Look, yeah, I know we're seeing Rachaad White get a lot more targets. We're seeing Cade Otton get a lot of targets. It's not because all of a sudden Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are bad or that they've been forgotten. It's just this offense diversifying, and that's good because that's going to force the defense to actually pay attention to other guys and not just the wideouts. The other thing is this Tennessee defense, it doesn't really pay much attention to wideouts, or if it does, it doesn't work because they're still bottom 7 in terms of fantasy points given up to wide receivers, and that's despite the fact that, honestly, they have not played a tough schedule against wide receivers. The last 4 weeks, they've played Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Indianapolis, and Baltimore. Those are not high-powered passing offenses. Sure, they've got some talented receivers, but again, these are not teams that are on the higher end of passing yardage. So they've really looked a lot better statistically than they have been. This is still a funnel defense as well. And so I feel like this is a week where both Godwin and Mike Evans are going to be good, but I like the fact that Chris Godwin gets such a steady target share. He is top 20 in total targets among all players. He's gotten at least 5 targets in every single game. And though while you think, Tennessee, not a team that's going to get into a back and forth shootout type of affair, their pace of play has picked up significantly since Will Levis took over at quarterback. And so at the very least, they're going to be forced to pass the ball more, and they'll be able to pass the ball more. I mean, Baker Mayfield is actually playing really well lately. So if you have Chris Godwin, don't worry. Keep him in your lineup. I feel he's due for a big-time bounce back. As always, we got you covered for everything you need to win in fantasy. Check out our Week 10 playlist for start sit advice and more.